Hi class, Idris, Shawn, and Andrea here for Module 7, looking at politics and school finance, specifically the case study in Clark County School District in Nevada. We're going to just kind of go through the articles here. One of the things that we chatted about earlier was the connection between our readings here in 702 and what we're doing in 712 with the coding exercise, also about Clark County School District. And so although we'll start with the DM Sampson and Browning article, looking at the history of Clark County. Guys, anything that jumped out at you? And I'm sorry, I threw them for a loop. We were going to start with Mayo, and then I...
Right.
That's my fault.
No problem. What kind of stood out for me was how they said, well, first of all, it's kind of awesome that Dr. Sampson wrote this article. So I hope we do it justice with our critiques and everything, but how decentralization comes in two forms. You know, it's administrative decentralization that comes with, you know, reorganizing school districts and allowing school districts to make their key decisions. And then the second form was the community control, where there's kind of local empowerment and community groups make the decision for those schools in the district. So I like the way that she kind of divided it up so we could, you know, kind of get kind of two perspectives on decentralization. So that was kind of helpful to me.
Yeah, what stood out for me from that article was it was something that wasn't as familiar with, so it was really educational for me, the whole process. But the process of how the new bill got passed was it was frustrating and fascinating, I think, at the same time for me. It was it was interesting to see how when you had politicians that just lined up, they pounced on a small open window to make something happen very quickly, and it was really frustrating to see that there wasn't a debate. No, it was pushed so quickly that there wasn't a lot of time for research to be presented or discussion, and it makes me think long term how, you know, if you really want the teachers' buy-in and you want this to be successful and you want this to work, how do you expect that to work if just throw it down and go, no, we're going to mandate, we're just going to do this and it's just going to happen? You know, whenever I have a change and that affects other people, the first thing that I do is I try to at least hear them out of, you know, where they're coming from, what their voice is, and we might still disagree, and I might still go through with that change, or the university might still go with the change. But I think if someone's really listening and hearing them out and going, where are you coming from? Okay, how can we try to come to a balance or come to some type of compromise? And it wasn't. And I'm going, well, do you really think this is going to be successful in the future if you just kind of make this happen and go ahead, just do it? So it'll be fascinating to see the results, you know, 5-10 years down the road.
Yeah, agreed. I thought it was a brilliant case study to pull in the two theories that they talked about, and particularly the kingdom's multiple stream theory. That was in one of the last weeks, the article that I focused on, and it beautifully it talks about the problems, then the policies, the politics, and that window of opportunity when the Republicans controlled the governorship and both houses of the legislature and just pushed that through. And I think it was best encapsulated on page 20, one of the last quotes in the conclusion, that, as you said, Shawn and Idris, such top-down and narrowly focused policy mandates signifies an interesting power play that, as previously explained, seems to contradict efforts to shift power to school-level communities. So, you know, it was all about the face of, oh yeah, we're going to empower all these communities and we're going to make the legislation there to make it happen. And I worked in state government in Florida once, and the unfunded mandates are the things that tend to hang people up. It's, you know, you have to do this or you're going to get in trouble, but we're not going to give you any money to do it. So I think that kind of leads us. I know Baker talked about that specifically in his video when he's like, the funding is absolutely a necessary underlying condition. It's a prerequisite, condition for innovation. And I think that that kind of leads us into Malin's article, looking at the funding and state initiatives, and you know, the power of the state to decentralize. And where accountability of the state and accountability that they make on school districts. Anything jump out at you from Malin?
I like the the low impact versus high impact, where, you know, low impact where there's less state involvement. You know, it's either by choice or, you know, very intentional, where the educators and the teachers kind of disregard what, you know, the higher ups are saying, but then they're focusing on what more of what they want to do. But then versus the high impact, you know, it kind of restricts the autonomy of those schools, but it accounts for more oversight and more accountability, and more performance standards, more so than the low impact version. So that's kind of what stood out to me in this article. What do you guys think?
Yeah, the low impact, high impact, that was fascinating to me, and it reminded me of a few. Before I was in higher ed, I taught overseas at the Republic of Moldova for a couple of years, and it was fascinating to think of, you know, the low impact when you know, we had different mandates that came down. We were required to follow them. I'm not sure if you hear my dog barking. Sorry, it was a little distracting. But we were when I first got in the classroom to teach, they gave us an English book, and we were mandated to teach it, and the students were nowhere near the level of where they should have been. It was probably, for a native speaker, it would be difficult. This was 5th through 9th grade English, and these students could barely say hello, how are you? And I'm going, how am I going to teach this? And so what was fascinating to see, even in the article, of how students navigated, how teachers navigated how they took the mandate and how they adapted. So I think even with the teachers with the merit pay, and they had one that decided to actually take the merit pay, and they distributed that across the way through everyone. And I feel like I see that over and over again, is when the mandates come down, and if you don't have buy-in from the teachers, that they're going to or at least to the best of their abilities, they're going to find a different way to navigate the process. And I've seen that too, even with advisors on our campus. If there's a mandate to come down, of going, well, the first thing to go is, if they don't have buy-in, what can we do to kind of either just get through this or do the minimal effort?
Yeah, that's it. When you pull a power play on somebody, it doesn't really turn out often the way you want it. For me, I think one of the quotes that jumped out from Malin was that decentralization became a way to increase local responsibility rather than enhance local autonomy. So again, it's, you know, we need you to do this, but and you're going to be held responsible for it, but you don't really get to make the decisions about what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. I think what was the other one, that it was the resources. Was it games of control and escape from control? So it's how can we do this with the least amount of effort to tick the boxes, and ultimately, though, you know, what happens with the students on that. I think that leads into a little bit in the Baker and Green article, with looking at, you know, the whole new normal, and what, you know, when schools have to reframe that, you know, an expectation of state support, and that's financial support, but really what's happening then is that they compete with these charter schools, and the whole themes of the political rhetoric. Anything in that article jump out at either of you?
Yeah, so the new normal is kind of doing more with a whole lot less, and so that was clearly unreasonable for schools to, you know, still be held accountable, but, you know, still you're taking the funds away. But also another thing that stood out to me was how, you know, how the charter schools were, you know, promising one thing, but in actuality, they weren't delivering on, you know, what they said they were going to do. And so that was kind of, you know, so the school choice is not really, you know, they weren't really delivering on what they were saying, which was, you know, kind of sad at, you know, at the same time. So that's kind of, you know, what stood out to me. And oh, I'm sorry. And also, you know, he was, you know, advocating for more funding, but he was, you know, kind of saying that the allocation or the distribution of the funds need to be in sort of targeted areas to kind of yield the best results and to help students, you know, in kind of low performing or low income areas. So I thought he was really, he really eloquently stated that in the article as well.
Yeah, Idris, I agree with the charter schools. That's something that probably stood out to me from this article. Is I was surprised when you looked at the demographics of students in the charter schools versus the public schools, how different they were, with students receiving free lunch or English language learners, were things that I wasn't aware of. But I do recall, I think one of my first graduate professors was saying, if you're ever going to ask a reason why with education, he was talking more with higher education, but probably applies to secondary as well, in primary, is that he said, if you're ever asking why, he said it's probably boils down to the money, and that can probably tell the story of why things are and why they occur that way. And another point that kind of stood out for me from this article was the term adequacy funding. And I feel like I've seen that, especially in the last 10 years. I'm going, yes, I just didn't term it that way, but I said, yes, that's exactly what we're experiencing. You know, in California, since the recession, we were hurting pretty hard. But after when Jerry Brown came in governor in 2010, he started, you know, collecting money for the reserves, and he did a really good job. But he was maxing out the amount of reserves that we had in California, meaning that he couldn't put more money in the reserves, so he had to spend it. And so in 2014, 15, 16, he just kept putting money into the reserves, and we were like, we could really use that money. We could really do some great work with it, but he did not give us the money we needed because of adequacy funding, of going, well, I think you have enough to do your job, and that's it, even though we're proving to him that, no, I think we really need this money. We could do some really good things. So I did think there was a quote that stood out to me. It says, on average, this is in the Baker and Green article, on average, even large-scale studies across multiple contexts, aggregate measures of per pupil spending positively associated with improved and higher student income. So outcomes, excuse me. So essentially, if we are giving students more money, I think there should be some oversight, but I think there's a good correlation that, well, if you fund them, students tend to be probably going to be more successful or get the outcomes that you want.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like, you know, Professor Baker in his video, when he was talking, saying the funding is absolutely a necessary underlying condition. It's a prerequisite for innovation. I already mentioned that, but looking at when you look at the schools in low performing areas that have a high number of minority students, English language learners, all of the social interventions that also have to happen. You know, schools become babysitters, schools become the moral educator as well. And when you say, oh, you have enough money to teach them to read and write and this, like just like was the example was figuring not from the video, but figuring New Hampshire into the average. You're like, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, no, they're two different states with two different social issues. And when you pulled New Hampshire out of that average, the difference that the Rhode Island schools would make. So when you're comparing yourself to these other states and having fun with numbers, like, right. Jerry, it's raining now. Don't put the money away for a rainy day. Our umbrella has holes in it.
Right. And Andrea, like you were saying, the schools become so much more than just school. You were saying there were babysitters and, for extracurricular activities. And so I think that's where the interventions and the innovations need to come, and he even mentions, gosh, I forgot what page it's on, but, childhood development, resources and things of that nature. So, there's a ton of resources that money could be allocated to yield the best results for the students.
Yeah, and I wonder if it initially struck to me, is this an equity issue with students that if we're teaching more to the test, and we see it right now with the SAT, we have students that have more accessibility or more funds to get tutors or more prep and practice, so they're going to do well on SAT. Doesn't mean they're brighter or more prepared. It just means they have more resources. And so if we're teaching more to the test, I know some schools were even hiring like test prep to help the teachers prepare for the test. And I'm going, is that going to happen in a low-income school compared to another school? And going, my God, are we teaching to the test? And is that creating more inequity?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. With Malin's article talking about the state standards and the accountability, and then when the test begins, let's see, the indicator of performance becomes the goal itself. So it's teaching to that test, it becomes the curriculum rather than what does this school need and this community need. That goes back to the responsibility without the autonomy to shape what happens in schools.
Exactly. He says the focus shifted to getting the results, and it caused frustration, resentment, amongst the teachers. Mm-hmm. So, and which even caused teachers to either, switch schools because of the pressure, or, and he even said that they even caused them to switch jobs, stop teaching altogether. Yeah. So once you put that much pressure on the test, you're not only, affecting the students, you're affecting, someone's livelihood and someone's profession as well.
Yeah, and that's what I think of, kind of the unintended consequences of what happens when you approach an educational issue this way. Thinking of Mailing, he had a quote of the desire to view schools as the cause and the cure for national economic issues. And I'm thinking of like the Nation at Risk report, and it reminds me of higher education and the rankings, and how different either state governments or even university presidents say we want to climb in the rankings, and not necessarily better our education, but have a higher ranking. And I was reading, and I think it was in Florida, I could be wrong, that there was a school that they said the easiest way to increase your rankings is to get a med school. And I think it was a school at the University of Florida that didn't want a med school. I think they had like 8 in the state, and they said, no, we have enough. But the governors kind of pushed it through, and they were like, we don't need this. And so there was a lot of just, we're going to enforce this to make this happen, even though the people that are on the ground level are saying, no, we don't need it, which is, very unfortunate.
Yeah, that sounds like something Rick Scott would do.
Yeah, having taught in Florida before I went overseas, I was a career changer, and one of the statistics is that half of career changers will go back to or leave teaching within 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I knew after 2, and I was at one of the best schools. You want to talk about rankings? Yeah, Newsweek and US News Report, World, that one. Had my high school as one of the top 10 in the US. And even with that, it was after 2 years, I'm like, the bureaucracy of it. So yeah, God bless Florida. No.
We need it.
Any final thoughts, guys? I think we found one of the common themes was, looking at spending in education, and it's so disparate, and the low income and diverse areas need more money and potentially even more autonomy in order to truly impact student learning.
Yeah, I think I think not only more funding, but I think more oversight in the allocations of where that money goes. That's what I kind of gathered from everything.
Yes, no, I agree too. Having that balance of the oversight and autonomy would be great.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much, colleagues, for sharing your time with us today, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. Take care.